Thank you, everyone, for attending today's Lunch and Learn on managing Medicare and ECLIPSE claims in Genie. My name is Sean Nolan, and I am the Customer Education Specialist here at Genie Solutions. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we stand. For me in Brisbane, this is the Turrbal and the Yagara peoples. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. The purpose behind today's presentation is to give everyone an insight into the best ways to handle bulk bill, DVA, and ECLIPSE claims. In my past experience of training, this is a very misunderstood part of Genie. And if you don't follow a process, it can result in significant problems down the track. So as part of today, I wanted to impart knowledge of processes in Genie that Genie trainers show to practice staff on how to process these claims. The aim is that once you have an understanding of how these processes work, that it should significantly reduce problems and reduce the number of times you may need to contact our support team. Just before we start handling bulk bill, DVA, and ECLIPSE claims, it is important to ensure that the invoices have been sent off and batched correctly. We will be emailing links to our knowledge base with how to create these invoices. This is because for us to maximize the value of today's presentation, we wanted to focus on the handling of the claims. First part of today's presentation is to look at common errors we find when you try to batch bulk bill or DVA claims. After you click the Create Transmission button, you may receive an error message. Often this is to do with one or more patients as part of the batch. As part of your investigations, you may need to do some detective work to work out which item number is causing the problem. I will be going through some common error messages shortly. Once you have found the problem item number, you should select the item number and choose Remove Highlighted. This will exclude it from the transmission, and it will allow you to transmit the other items. This item number will continue to appear in the new transmission window, but hopefully you should then be able to resolve the issue with the problematic item number to then be able to submit it as part of the next batch. So often when you receive an error message, you will see what the issue is. The first error message is this one. In this instance, an item number has a service date that is more than 2 years old. It does tell you the date of service of the affected item. So 2012-2019 means 20th of December 2019 in this example. An item more than 2 years old can't be claimed, and it may need to be written off. This is a fairly common error since the upgrade to Medicare Web Services. The key part to read is that the time supplied must not be in the future. The service time of an item is ahead of the current time. So for the example I have on the screen, the service time of the appointment is 12:30 p.m., but the current time might be 11:30 a.m. right now. So the time of service is ahead of the current time. The way to resolve this is to adjust the service time in the invoicing window to the time the service actually took place, rather than using the time of the appointment. This error message occurs when the notes or service text of an item number contains an invalid character. It can also be where the site of service contains an invalid character. You will see in the screenshot example, there's an apostrophe at the end of Andrews in the first line. Another common symbol that is put into service text or the notes of an item is a bracket symbol. The resolution is to remove the symbol that is causing issues and ensure all text in the service text or the practice sites is using one of these that I've listed here. Next, I'm going to be talking about how to process bulk bill and DVA claims. As part of the reports that come back from Medicare and DVA, there are 2 reports. The first report is what's called an exception report. This is where Medicare or DVA give a status of any relevant exceptions or issues to do with the claim. When it comes to Genie, Genie doesn't actually show you the items that have no issue with them. It'll only show you issues as part of the exception report. The second report is called a payment report. This is the confirmation that the batch has been paid. You need both of these reports in order to receipt a claim. There is a drop-down menu at the top, which allows you to see different claims in different sections. Next, I'm going to go through what each section means and what you should do in each section. The first section is Awaiting Reports. The Awaiting Reports section shows claims that have not yet got either the exception report or the payment report. One thing to note is that you need to get these reports yourselves. These reports normally take 2 business days after sending a claim. I do recommend that you wait 2 business days after a claim has been sent to get these reports. When in the Awaiting Reports section, you select the batch you wish to retrieve the report for, then click Retrieve Reports. A progress bar will appear. This claim will then disappear and it will go into either exceptions to review or ready to receipt if there are reports available. If there are no reports available, Genie will tell you there are no reports available. It is advised to try again the next business day. You repeat this for each claim you have. If you find that it's been more than 2 business days after you've sent a claim and you still can't get the reports, it is advised to contact the service desk of Medicare. The reason being is that there may be an issue. They may not have even received this particular batch from you. The Exceptions to Review screen shows all claims that have been sent through to Medicare or DVA, but a problem has been identified. When it comes to handling exceptions, you should always determine which scenario this exception belongs to. Handle the exception accordingly, then delete the exception. The golden rule at the end is that we want our claimed amount to equal our paid amount before we receipt. By placing these exceptions into scenarios, it helps us achieve this goal. To go to our Exceptions to Review screen, we click the drop-down menu that says Awaiting Reports. Then we click Exceptions to Review. This shows all claims that have an exception. It shows how many exceptions on the right. You will also note that there may be a payment showing, and that for some claims, the claimed amounts and the paid amounts are not equal. Just because there is an exception, it does not mean that it has not been paid. A very common mistake is assuming an exception means no payment. The claim is resubmitted then in this instance, and an exception comes back saying benefit previously paid. I am going to use the word exception rather than rejection, but just remember exceptions are problems with the claim, and sometimes you might still be paid for these. I always like to think of an exception as a post-it note that might be attached to a paper invoice. If you have taken the right action, you should then remove that post-it note from the invoice. It's the same type of thinking for exceptions. Once you have handled the exception, you should delete the exception. To look at exceptions, we highlight the claim, then click Review Exceptions. There are 3 scenarios of exceptions. I'm going to cover each of these and how these are handled next. When handling an exception, it is important to identify which scenario the exception belongs to first. Then you handle the exception based on the message provided. Once you have handled the exception using the scenario, you should take any corrective actions, then delete the exception. Our goal before we receipt a claim is to ensure that the claimed amount equals the paid amount. So by handling the exception correctly, it helps you achieve this goal. This is what an exception to review looks like. It will list which batch number, which service date, item number, and patient name is an exception. It also shows how much you asked for and how much they have chosen to pay. So it is important to handle each exception individually because as part of a batch, you may have multiple exceptions. You should go through each exception in a batch and handle it based on the scenario. So for scenario 1, it is where an exception has been raised, but they have still chosen to pay you in full. In the screen, you will see the item number, service date, and patient name. What you will critically see is that the claimed amount equals the paid amount. This means it is a scenario 1 claim. When we have this scenario selected as well, you will see that there is a red message, and this tells you what the exception message is. When it comes to a scenario 1, there is no need to resubmit this item to Medicare or DVA because they have already chosen to pay us. I will show you how to handle a scenario 1. We highlight the claim and we click Review Exceptions. We can see there is one exception. For this exception, the claimed equals the paid. Therefore, this is scenario 1. We can see the red message indicates the patient has a new Medicare number, but they've still chosen to pay us. When handling an exception for bulk bill DVA, we always take an action first. In the Edit Patient screen, we verify online. This will bring in a patient's new Medicare card number. Once we have done this, we have taken the action for this exception, we should delete the exception. Genie asks, are you sure? We are sure. Deleting an exception is a way of saying, I wish to remove the note attached to this item, the note saying that there was a problem. If there are any further exceptions, they will show next in the screen. You should then handle any further exceptions required. Once there are no more exceptions to review, the claim will move to Ready to Receipt. Scenario 2 is where you have been paid, but it is not the same amount as what you're asking for. So in this scenario, claimed and paid are different. You may have been paid less or more than what you were asking for. In this scenario, we normally adjust the fee, so what we are asking for equals what they have chosen to pay. The only time for bulk bill and DVA claims that you do not adjust the fee is if it is clearly incorrect and you're chasing a top-up amount from Medicare or DVA. Most of the times, the assessment from Medicare and DVA is accurate. Often a cause of scenario 2 claims is if you haven't done the most recent fee schedule update for Medicare or DVA. So I do strongly recommend, if you're constantly getting scenario 2s, that you do a fee schedule update, and this can often resolve or remedy that issue. So we have identified that this is a scenario 2 claim. Item has been paid, but is not equal to pay. Item paid, but is not equal to what we claimed. We can see they have chosen to pay us more than we are asking, and the red message tells us this accordingly. Again, there is no need to resubmit this to Medicare or DVA, as they have already chosen to pay us. Let us look at handling a scenario 2. We highlight the claim and review exceptions. And when we highlight the claim, you can see that there is a payment for this exception, but it is less than what we had asked for. Medicare have said they've increased the benefit. As this claim has been paid, we are asking ourselves, are we willing to accept this difference? As mentioned before, most of the time for Medicare and DVA, you will. We're going to edit this item by clicking that Edit Item button, and we're going to change our fee to be equal to what they paid us. We have taken our action. Next, we should delete our exception. This removes the exception. We then handle the next item in the same manner as it is also a scenario 2. So for scenario 2s, I always recommend that you ask yourself, are you willing to accept this difference? And if you are, you should click the Edit button and change what you're asking for, being the fee, equal to the payment amount. Scenario 3 is where there is no payment against the item at all. So where you have claimed an amount and the paid amount is 0. This is the most common exception, and incorrect handling of this exception causes issues. In this scenario, we can see they have chosen to pay us $0 because allegedly Medicare or DVA have already paid for this item on the service date. In scenario 3s, we often need to remove the problematic item from the batch. and either delete from the account history or resubmit it to Medicare or DVA, possibly with an amendment. Here is another scenario 3. They have declined this item because you can only claim one in a period of time. Another scenario 3. And for the scenario 3, they are not paying for the service because this item requires an additional item to be claimed. We will be emailing a link to our knowledge base after this presentation with a list of common exceptions and what they mean. As there are a very large number of different exceptions, it is not possible for us to go through every scenario, but the link contains the most common and frequent that we find. It is important to remember for scenario 3 exceptions that they almost always require some detective work as to why they've rejected the claim. Let us look at handling a scenario 3. We can see the exception says it is a duplicate of item already quoted. So this tells us maybe we have invoiced the same item twice for the service date. Next, if I open my account history for the patient, and I choose the right invoice, you can see legitimately that there is a duplicate here indeed for this item. If this item can legitimately be done twice, it may need to be amended and resent. Otherwise, if it is an error and it should only be done once, it should be deleted from the account history. We have done the first part of the exception, which is identifying why it was an exception. We should now remove it from the batch, as it is holding up other items in this batch. Remember, our goal is to make sure the claimed and paid amounts are equal. At the moment, they are different by this difference here. So this is why in this scenario 3, we are removing it from the batch. So I select my item and click Remove Item from Batch. I click OK to this message. It is saying it will appear in the new transmission window. That is quite important. I'll touch on why later. Genie asks, are you wanting to delete the exception attached to this item as well? Which we do. Now, if we have a look at the new transmission window, you can see the item is here. So when you remove an item from a batch, it automatically goes into the new transmission window, ready to be sent. Have we actually fixed the problem though? Let's go back to our account history. We do not want this item to be transmitted in the next batch. Otherwise, we will continue to have the same problems as before. So in this situation, our action is to remove the duplicate, but you may need to amend the item in some circumstances. And if that is the case, you then do send it in the new transmission window. So for this example, we're going to double click on our invoice and we're going to remove this duplicate item. This will remove it from Genie. And as a result, it will not appear in the new transmission window either. A misconception is that all items on a claim are visible in exceptions to review. This is not the case. If we have a look at the claim at the top, you can see there's one exception, 506 claimed, 402 paid. When we double click on a batch, it shows you all patients in that batch. So you can see there is more than one patient, and the exception screen said there's only one exception. Therefore, exceptions only show you problems. There might be other items which have no problems. Please do not click this delete button at the bottom of the batch unless you are confident the entire batch has been rejected. This is a common cause of headaches for practices, as all these items appear in the new transmission window, and when batched, all these items will be rejected with a message of benefit previously paid. In my experience in training, I've been to practices where there was only one item rejected, 5 items paid. And unfortunately, the delete button was clicked at the bottom, which meant all those items appeared in the new transmission window. And so 6 items were sent. 5 items were rejected because benefit previously paid, and the original item was still rejected for the original reason. That is why it's dangerous clicking this delete button at the bottom. Only click this delete button unless you're confident the entire batch has been rejected. And even then, please proceed with caution. The Ready to Receipt screen shows all claims that have a payment advice. There are no exceptions with any of these claims. Either the claim had no exceptions to begin with, or the exception has been handled and deleted, so it is no longer an issue. When you receipt a claim, you first need to ensure the claimed amount is equal to the paid amount. If the claimed equals paid, we are safe to receipt. We click Receipt. Next, we should ensure that we change the date of receipt to be equal to the payment date, which is in the claims list. We should also ensure that we insert the run number next to the payment reference. This is the reference number of the direct deposit, so you can reconcile with your bank account. Next, we allocate to the receipt to outstanding items. If and only if the red equals the green, meaning the amount owing equals the amount to be allocated, we click Order Fill. Then we finish our receipt. If you have a look at the second claim in this window, you can see claimed and paid are different. This indicates the exception was not correctly handled, and instead of removing an item from the batch or adjusting the fee, the exception was just deleted. We should re-retrieve the exception report to ensure we have handled the exceptions correctly. We click the claim and click Retrieve Reports. We will receive a message saying, we have already retrieved it. Do we still want to re-retrieve? We say re-retrieve the exception report. We will also receive a message to re-retrieve the payment reports. This will bring back all exceptions and will move the claim to exception to review. This includes exceptions you may have already handled. So it is important to take care when you go through each of these exceptions. There's a good chance that most of them you have actually already handled correctly. You're just looking for the one that maybe you did not handle correctly. Now that completes our basic overview of Medicare and DVA claims. As mentioned, this section will be recorded along with the Eclipse section and will allow you to further play back the video and ensure that the concepts are understood. There's also going to be links to our knowledge base for how to handle claims and also sending the claims of bulk bill and DVA. So the next part of today I want to talk about is the ECLIPSE claims. ECLIPSE is a part of inpatient claiming in Genie. It is used for known gap, no gap, and patient claims to health funds. Just as for bulk bill and DVA claims, out of maximizing our time we have together today, we won't be covering any invoices for ECLIPSE, nor spending any time on patient claims. We will be handling exceptions and processing these claims as our focus for today. Just before we go through the processing of claims, I want to make a mention of the #1 exception I have encountered in my time as a trainer. This is a problem when you create an invoice. If you have a patient with Medibank Private or AHM, they must always go through as scheme, even if you're invoicing a no-gap patient. The only reason you would choose agreement with these two funds is if you have an MPAA. This is very rare. Please consult our knowledge base for information on how to send claims for Medibank Private, even if this is a no-gap patient. There are 2 reports you need before you can receipt an ECLIPSE claim. Before any reports are available, there's a button you can click called Get Report Status, and this will tell you where the claim is up to in the processing between Medicare and the health fund, and you can see it move along the system. The processing report is a report on how Medicare and the health fund have processed the claim. It will tell you what the intended payment for the item is. It is important to note that this is an intended payment, not an actual payment. If there are any exceptions for the claim, these will show in the processing report as well. Now, it can take sometimes up to 7 days after sending a claim to get this report. A remittance advice is the confirmation money has been put into the nominated bank account. It can take anywhere between 2 and 40 days after sending a claim to get a remittance advice. The times for processing reports and remittance advices are completely dependent on the health fund and Medicare. The best way to work through ECLIPSE sections and to reduce the chances of issues when you get to the receipting stage is to always follow a process. I have got a process here, which you should follow from the top to the bottom, and you should not skip steps. Whilst it might feel faster and tempting in the short term to skip a step, for example, dealing with the exceptions, the complications that arise from this will take much longer to unravel. This table, a copy of it will be emailed to all participants at the end of this presentation. So next I'm going to go through each section of what I've got in the table here and work through how we work through the claims in these sections. First, I'm going to show you how to handle claims in the submitted section. Using the table that was provided earlier, I'm going to highlight all the claims in the system, then click Get Report Status. That is all I need to do. I do not need to click any other buttons. A progress bar will appear, then disappear. Any claims that have progressed to the next stage will disappear to the next section that we call Await Processing Report. It can be normal for claims to remain in this window for sometime up to 2 weeks. If a claim remains here after you've clicked Get Report Status, it just means that you haven't got the report yet from Medicare and DVA. Medicare and the health funds. I'm also going to be pointing out the last 2 columns. This tells you where the claim is between Medicare and the health funds. If a claim says health fund processing for 2 months, it is possible that maybe the health funds have an error with processing the claim, and that's who you should contact next for further advice. Our next section is Await Processing Report. This is where all claims go to that have moved on from the submitted section. Same type of action as for our submitted section. We highlight all the claims, and once we're in the section, we highlight all the claims, and we click Get Processing Report. The claims should jump into either exceptions to review if there's a problem for you to look at, or to the waiting remittance advice if there are no problems for you to look at. For us to talk about exceptions, we need to know what a healthy claim looks like first. If we have a look at our waiting remittance advice section, you can see that some claims are pink and some are green. Green means there are no problems. Pink means there's a problem. Sometimes pink means there's an exception for you to look at. So what I've done, I've selected a green claim and then clicked View Processing Report, and that presents this window, which we call the Processing Report. You can see the writing at the top in green says there's no errors, which means there's nothing adverse from Medicare. The health fund may give you an overall assessment on the claim. In the service level messages, this is where you can see an assessment for each item. For the first item, which is a 116, we can see the item, the service date. Now, original charge is how much you wanted from Medicare, health fund, and the patient combined when you created this invoice. Current charge is how much you're expecting from Medicare and the health fund only, according to the account history of a patient. Fund benefit is how much the health fund plans to pay. Medicare benefit is how much Medicare plans to pay. Total benefit is Medicare and the health fund combined. For a healthy item, you want to ensure the current charge, which is the amount you're asking for in the account history from Medicare and the health fund, is equal to the total benefit, how much they plan to pay you. One other thing you'll note as well is the writing of each of these items is black, which means the current charge equals the total benefit. You will see that there's no Medicare error with the item, and the health funds are satisfied. Therefore, there are no problems with this claim. Let us have a look at what causes problems with claims, otherwise known as exceptions. There are 4 scenarios of Eclipse exceptions. I'm going to go through each of these with you. Just like the Medicare and DVA exceptions, you should always identify what scenario the exception is in. Always follow the advice of the scenario, of course making any alterations that you need. A Scenario 1 claim is where an exception has been identified for 1 or more items. The amount you're asking for, according to the account history, which we call the current charge, is equal to the total benefit. So there are no problems with payment, but an issue was still identified for you to look at. Normally, this exception occurs when there's a new Medicare number for the patient. Just like for bulk bill and DVA claims, we should always take an action, but we don't have to delete any exceptions when it comes to Eclipse. As there is a benefit, we do not remove the item from the claim, nor should we delete the claim. I will cover why we do these later in our presentation. So here is a Scenario 1 claim. We can see that there is a total benefit, so the amount they plan to pay us is equal to our current charge, which is the amount in the account history. We can see they've issued an exception in regards to the Medicare number. We should verify it online and update the Medicare card. This is us taking an action from an exception. To get there, I click the Edit Patient Details screen in the exception window. Once we have taken the action, we can see that the claim has disappeared into the Awaiting Remittance Advice section, which is the right thing. We have handled our exception. A Scenario 2 exception is where there's a difference between the current charge and total benefit for an item, but there is still an intended benefit for an item. This sometimes occurs when there's a fee schedule that has not been applied recently. It can also occur where Medicare pay a benefit and the health fund do not. The question you should ask yourself when handling a Category 2 claim is, are you willing to accept this difference in payment? If you're willing to accept the difference, you should click Update Item, which also changes the fee in the account history for you. This is similar to the bulk bill DVA example we had earlier. If you are not willing to accept this difference, for instance, you're chasing a top-up, you should not click Update Item. You then continue handling this claim like normal. If Update Item button was not clicked, when you receive this claim, the claim will go to Part Paid, allowing you to manage your top-ups. Again, we do not remove the item from the claim, nor delete the claim, as there is a benefit against the item. Here is a Scenario 2. We can see that the line for the item is red, which means there is a problem. We can see how much we are asking for when we sent the claim. The original charge is equal to the fund rebate, which is the amount in the account history. We can see that the total benefit on the right does not equal our fund rebate. So this is why the line has been put in red. There is a difference. If I just go back to the account history, you can see that we're asking for $55.60, not $55.55 the Medicare and health fund plan to pay. Are we willing to accept this difference? Normally, yes, for a few cents. It's not worth investigating with the health funds. We click Update Item. You'll see the original charge remains. How much we're currently expecting, that fund rebate column, is now equal to the total benefit. The line is turned blue because we clicked on the Update Item button. The claim has moved to Awaiting Remittance Advice because we've handled the exception, and you'll see the claimed amount here has changed as well. If we have a look at the account history, you can see the fee here has changed as well. So Update Item only if you're willing to accept the difference between what Medicare and the health fund have chosen to pay you. A Scenario 3 occurs where there's an exception for 1 or more items. 1 or more items have no benefit at all, but there are other items that do have a benefit. This category is often mishandled as well, with the whole claim being deleted then resent. The reason you do not delete the whole claim and resend the whole claim is if an item has a benefit currently and is then resent, Medicare will then reject it as being benefit previously paid, and you may not get paid for the item that was rejected. It is best just to resend the rejected item after you have taken the appropriate action for it to be paid, or to write off the item in the account history. Let us have a look at a scenario 3. You can see that the first item shows a benefit, but the second item has no benefit at all. If we have a look at the exception for the second item, you can see that it is a consultation that has been deemed as possibly aftercare, as it took place straight after a surgery. For category 3, we normally remove the item from the claim, so it hides it out from this claim. You will see the line has been italicized and grayed out. This claim will then disappear as we've handled the first part of the exception, and it moves to the awaiting remittance advice section. Let's handle the rest of the exception, and we go to the account history using that Show in Account History button. The first action we could take is to write this item off, as even though it did occur, we can't claim for it. To do this, we write it off as a credit. To write off as a credit, we click once in the credit column, we wait a second, then click a second time. We type in how much we're crediting off, and then we type in a reason as to why we are writing this one off. You will see that the credit write-off appears at the bottom of the screen. What if we did want to claim this item 105, but with a correction or an amendment to the item? We will need to make the correction, then resubmit only the item or items that were rejected. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to delete this credit that I have here. Next, what we're going to be doing is to claim this item as not normal aftercare. This is the amendment to the item. This may not be the case for you, and when you get this exception. So please, if you get this particular exception, please handle it like you should for your practice. So in my hypothetical example, I'm going to double-click on my item. Next, I'm going to tick the box at the bottom that says Not Normal Aftercare. This is my amendment to the item. To resend an item or more than one items through Eclipse, we highlight the items we wish to resubmit. We don't highlight the one that's been paid previously, as this would get rejected for benefit previously paid. We click that Resend IMC Exceptions button at the top. This is a mini Eclipse window, with all the items we're reclaiming showing at the bottom. You would choose the same items as you would for a regular IMC invoice. After you submit this claim, the claim will appear in the Submitted section for the items that have been resubmitted. The last scenario is a very common scenario, but it's also the most severe. It means that every item on the claim has been rejected with no benefit on any item. Often a scenario 4 is a result of a fundamental problem, such as being a duplicate invoice, a problem with the health fund, your provider, or the patient. In a scenario 4, you often need to delete the claim from Eclipse, but you may keep the invoice. You make any corrections you need to in Genie, or with the health fund or the patient, and then you resubmit it through the account history. Sometimes you may need to delete the claim and delete the invoice, perhaps if it was a duplicate. And if needed, you may need to start again from scratch. Here, we can see that for all items on the claim, there is no benefit. It appears the health fund have rejected the claim as they have not got a registration for our doctor. The first thing that we should do in this one scenario, an exception, is to contact the health fund and confirm why there's no registration for our doctor. This needs to have been remedied by the health fund before we send through another submission through the Eclipse system. For any category 4s, we need to delete the claim from Eclipse. This is the only time you delete a claim from Eclipse. Now, there is a risk that you could delete the claim and It happens, a phone call comes in and you get preoccupied and then you forget on who the patient is. I'm going to show you the best way how to handle that particular scenario for scenario 4s. So the first thing that we do is we go to the account history first. This takes us to the right invoice. We keep this account history open, we don't close it. We go back to Eclipse. We select the claim and we choose Delete Claim. Genie asks, do you want to keep the invoice or delete the invoice? You delete the invoice only if this is not meant to be submitted or you want to start again from scratch. You keep the invoice if you plan to resubmit, maybe with some changes. I've kept the invoice. In the account history, we select the items to resubmit and that Resend IMC Exceptions button again. We again choose any relevant options that we need to here and click OK. This creates a new claim in the submitted section for the items that have been resent. The next section is the Awaiting Remittance Advice section, and it contains all claims that either have had exceptions dealt with or have had no exceptions to begin with. You will note there's no paid figure yet because we haven't yet got confirmation of payment. There's pink claims. There may still be an issue for you to look at. Green means there's no issues for you to look at. You should fix any pink claims whilst you're in the section. Just like the other sections, all we have to do is highlight claims and click that Get Remittance Advices button at the top. Claims that have been paid will jump to Ready to Receipt. Claims that have not yet been paid will remain here. Remember, the processing report will tell you if they do plan to pay you. They may just not have done so yet. Let us have a look at receipting claims next. We're going to move to the Ready to Receipt section. You can see that these claims all show payment figure. This means there is a remittance advice for the claim. Before receipting any claims, you should fix up any pinks if possible. This is clicking the View Processing Report button for the claim. Let us have a look at the best practice for receipting a claim. It is tempting to just click on a claim. You might make sure the claim and paid are equal, and then you click Receipt. There is a step I strongly advise that you do first before you click Receipt. You should select a claim and then click View Payment at the top right. This shows the remittance advice attached to a claim. Here you can see how much was paid, which bank account they have chosen to pay you, and critically, it shows you which claims were paid by the same remittance advice. We can see Claim ID 1 here in the remittance advice is Claim ID 1 in the Ready to Receipt screen. The mantra I like to use when it comes to receipting is for all claims paid by the same remittance advice, you should ensure that claim equals paid unless you are chasing a top-up payment. We can verify for this one claim that only one claim was paid by the remittance advice. And for this one, claimed equals paid, so it is safe for us to receipt. Next, we're going to click on our claim and click that receipt button at the top. The payment amount, reference, and dates are all pre-filled for you. You will note there's an autofill button at the right. This should never be clicked in Eclipse when receipting, as the right payment amount is automatically allocated to the right items. Clicking autofill in Eclipse means that money is incorrectly allocated to patients as it overrides the processing report. Again, this is a big issue for when you're trying to receipt claims, is often that autofill button is clicked. Please do not click that one in Eclipse. So I'm going to click on Store, and this moves the claim out of Ready to Receipt. Therefore, let's do the next one. We click View Payment. We can see two claims were paid by the same remittance advice. So, apologies, this was just one claim paid by this remittance advice. I choose Store. For this next one, there are two claims paid by this remittance advice. Number 3 and 4. So we need to ensure both of these are in the ready to receipt screen and the claimed and paid are equal. It does not matter which one we receipt. We just need to choose one. And when we go receipt, it receipts all claims as part of that remittance advice. And store. Now, remember how I mentioned you should check the payment report before receipting. Let's look at what happens when we don't. You will see for here claims 8 and 9 are paid by the same remittance advice. We can see claim 9, clearly the paid and claimed are not equal, and these should be handled before receipting. I'm going to ignore handling 9 just for demonstration purposes only, and just go to receipt the claim. A scary message appears, which I'm sure everyone on this call has had at some point. Let's look at the reason why we got that scary message. This window often comes up after you receive that message. This tells you why it could not receipt. Note that claim 9 is being presented, even though claim 8 was the one we were trying to receipt. Notice the error reason, paid more than claimed. This is Genie trying to tell you that it's trying to force a payment of $104.60 against the balance of an item, $104.55. So this is more than what we were asking for, and this is why the message came up. To ensure you reduce how many times you get this error, you should ensure you're using the View Payment window and Action Claims before you're receipting. If you're still receiving this window after doing so, the window will often tell you which claims according to the View Payment is problematic, along with the reasons why. If you are still unsure about why you're seeing this message when you're receiving this, when you try to receipt the claim, this is when you should contact my support team for further advice. Instead, let's fix claim 9. We can see this as a scenario 2, still a payment, but not what we asked for. We highlight and we choose Update Item. Now all claims are paid by the same remittance advice, and there are no problems with receipting.